Okay, so we're only to page 8 in the book. And we get the only, and I told you about L. Ron Hubbard, and I had this discussion with him, and I gave him the example of Spike Lee. Spike Lee caught all sorts of heat over Do the Right Thing because people said, well, you're just trying to stir up hate, racial hatreds, right? And somebody was breaking it down on particular scenes, and he said, hey, back off for a second. Can somebody, judge me for my body of work and stop fixating on one thing, right? I had this discussion I'm having with you right now. I said, you've got to apply that standard to Hubbard, right? So I say that because the only time he gives it, he does a significant quotation from L. Ron Hubbard is from a lecture, right? And he's in the convert part, still introducing Paul Haggis. Never says that Paul Haggis listened to this lecture. So I don't know what context that have. He just in the middle of the chapter goes off into this thing on L. Ron Hubbard. Okay, but I read this thing and he says, this is what Larry Wright says. He would just open his mouth and a mob of new thoughts would burst forth, elbowing each other in the race to make themselves known to the world. He's talking about L. Ron Hubbard in his lectures. They were often trivial and disjointed, but also full of obscure learned references. Okay? And so he takes an example. And I went, man, this is really bizarre. I looked at this quote. So I went to look at because it didn't sound like Hubbard to me. So I went and pulled out the transcript. And this just gives you an idea. But this is where he takes the quote. He takes the quote from here where that mark is, all right? And all of the pink highlighting are the text that he omitted. So as you can see, he quotes this, omits this, quotes that, 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 omits this, and omits this, okay? And if you look at it, it's more than half of the text, okay? And so that he can then call that a mob of new thoughts, racing out of his mouth. Of course, you could do that to anybody's writing, right? But what's crazy about this is at the end of that quote, he says, just as this fuzzy parable begins to ramble into incoherence. Well, of course it's incoherent because you took half of it out, number one. But two, I went on to read the lecture. He says, once the fuzzy parable begins to ramble into incoherence, Hubbard comes to the point, and then he gives the point. And I go back to the lecture, and it ain't the point at all. Okay? So I get the impression the guy is just trying to create an impression. There's no attempt to understand, even when he takes a section of the writing. He's not even trying to understand. He's trying to juxtaposition it to make it look like a fuzzy parable and just words racing out of his mouth.